I'm going to start off real quickly, just talk to you a little bit about what we're doing today. The first thing I'm doing is I will do the presentation about the worst questions to ask in an interview, which is an important issue because the main thing is when an employer is bringing you in, they do want to hire you. And so a lot of times people will ask questions that very quickly disqualify them from the job. And I've been hiring, for example, my business for recruiting jobs for over 20 years, and most people end up disqualifying themselves based on the questions that they ask. And it's the same thing with law firm interviews. And so after we do this presentation, then the next thing I'll be doing is taking questions, and I will take questions for as long as anybody asks questions. Anything you want to ask questions about, either during the webinar, questions that you have about the webinar, or just general career questions. I'm also happy to answer any questions you may have about your legal career, if you're just starting, or how long you may have been practicing. Any questions that you have, more than happy to answer. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing is you need to realize is the second you get an interview from an employer, the employer really does want to hire you. And most people think that when they go into an interview, they have to convince the employer to hire them and all these sorts of things. But honestly, you don't. The employer really does want to hire you. And it takes a lot of time for them to interview people. It takes hours. They could be billing. There's other things that they would probably much prefer to do, but they need help. And so they're bringing you in. And when they're interviewing you, they're really asking three questions. And there's a fourth question too. But the three questions are, can you do the job? Which your resume typically will show whether or not you can. But then the next two questions are, can you be managed and will you do the job long term? And I'm going to talk about those today. But this is really, those three questions are really the most important. And then there's a fourth question, which is do we like you? And do we like you really comes down to other aspects of your background that we'll talk about as well. But anytime you ask a question during an interview, you should keep in mind that the employer is really evaluating you through those sorts of questions, the questions that you ask and how they relate to that. And getting even one of these wrong can be fatal. You can lose jobs based on how you ask questions and whether or not the question shows you can't do the job or can't be managed, can't do the job long term. That question may make them not like you. And questions that make them not like you, by the way, are very interesting because you could ask a question about politics, you could ask a question about pro bono, all sorts of things that will get you in trouble very quickly. So when people ask questions, they may not even realize that they're asking the wrong questions. And the idea when you go into any interview is you don't need all this information about the employer before you get a job. Your objective really is to get the job first. And if you're going to ask questions, you should ask the right questions that are going to help you get the job. But your only objective in an interview is to get the job. You really do not have any other objective that's that important. You need to make sure that you're doing everything you can to get the job. And you may have some of the questions I'm going to cover right now. You may have some of these questions that you want to ask, but you really want to make sure you get the job before asking any of these. And asking these questions is really going to send the wrong message. And when you're interviewing, anytime you're thinking of a question that you may want to ask, one of the most important things you can do is put yourself in the potential employer's shoes. And employers have a lot of options, by the way, when they're hiring people. Many people believe that they don't, and so they ask all sorts of questions. That ends up really disqualifying themselves. And if you ask questions that turn off an employer, this is going to create all sorts of issues. And there's no reason to. Any job that you're interviewing for is typically going to have lots of applicants or lots of people that the employer could hire. And in most cases, the person that they do hire is going to be the person that doesn't rub them the wrong way. So the first list of questions is really questions that show you can't do the job. And doing the job just means that you have the ability, the skills, and the talent to do the work. Really, that just means that you can perform the way you're supposed to. The firm's going to want you in the office at a certain time. They're going to want you to be able to get assignments done on time. They're going to expect you to have good legal skills. And if you ask any questions that kind of show something different, it very quickly could disqualify you. Your objective really needs to be not to ask questions that show that you might not be able to do the job. So one of the first types of questions is questions about working from home. And this is a question that a lot of people will ask. And they'll ask things about how important FaceTime is. They'll ask, are they allowed to work at home if they get their assignments done? And sometimes they'll just even ask it in a kind of a roundabout way. Do a lot of attorneys work at home and so forth? And once you bring this up, you're really showing the employer that's important to you, that that's something that you want to do. And unfortunately, any type of reasons to work at home aside, for most employers, they do want you in the office to answer questions. They want you in the office to discuss things face to face. That's just important to them. This is why law firms rent offices and so forth. It's why they have secretaries, why they have receptionists, why they have libraries, and why they have all these, different things there. Once you ask that question, the employer is going to assume that half of you will be missing. So you're really only half of you can do the job, your presence. And I hate to say this because I know a lot of people work at home, and I'm not saying that there's necessarily anything wrong with it, but for the majority of employers, meaning more than 50%, it is very important for them that you're working in an office and doing your job. And that's just what the job is for them. It's not enough. A lot of people assume that just being able to do the work, meaning get assignments done in time and so forth, is what's important. But they really do want your presence. People that ask these questions about working from home, honestly, they disqualify themselves all the time because it's just something you just can't say. And I have so many stories about attorneys that have demanded to work at home a couple days a week, and some of them even had other jobs, if you can believe it. I had one guy that had been an engineer all through law school, took a job at a major New York law firm in their Palo Alto office, and was still an engineer collecting a salary of $130,000 a year or something, while making over $200,000 as an attorney. And he used the working at home time to go into the office at his other job. And who knows what this guy was doing. But companies like Yahoo, their performance went down dramatically from work. All these, it's just not a good thing to bring up. So you need to be careful. And that doesn't mean that you can't work at home when you get there. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with working at home. And personally, I think a lot of people get a lot more accomplished at home. So I'm not saying that, there's anything wrong with working at home, but most employers would rather bring it up themselves and not have you do that. Okay, there's also a lot of questions that people ask about hours, and that's also something you shouldn't bring up. If you ask how many hours your average associate bills, or do attorneys work on the weekends, you just shouldn't ask those sorts of questions. And if you ask about hours, then the interviewer is just going to assume you're concerned about hours. And law firms make money by you billing a lot of hours. And once you ask about hours, they're going to assume that you're not willing to do what it takes to get the work done, that it's going to be a concern for you. And if there's too many hours, you may leave. There's just law firms operate businesses. They're like ER rooms. A client could come in with a very serious issue that could require you to work 24 hours straight. I once came into work on a Wednesday and didn't leave until a Sunday morning. Then I got home and fell asleep finally. Then the partner called and said she hadn't gotten an assignment that I'd sent her. And I guess the reason why was because they'd shut down the servers to reset them, and they did it once a week. And so I was told to go back in the office. So if there's an emergency, you need to work a lot of hours, and you need to do filings and so forth. And law firms want soldiers. They want people that are just going to give it their all. And if you think about like a war issue, like if a country's going to war and it has a bunch of soldiers, if different soldiers decide they're not going to fight, that's a problem. So you can't operate a law firm like that either. And most employers don't want that. So once you ask about hours, they're going to assume that's a problem for you. It depends on how you frame the question, of course, but it's just not a good question to ask about. Another issue is questions that indicate an eagerness to start. So if you're currently employed, bad questions are things like, how soon could I start? Trying to make a decision quickly. How quickly are you deciding whom to hire? Anytime someone has asked me that kind of question in an interview, they've almost always been people that have lost their job and have come to work for us, and have been problems there as well. Law firms have the same lesson. The same things happened to many law firms in the past. Many law firms, of course, will have lay people off, they fire them, all sorts of things happen. So people become very eager to get jobs. And I completely understand that. And also you have living expenses and so forth. But law firms, when you go into an interview, they're looking for weaknesses. And a weakness would be asking about hours, asking about not willing to work at home, asking about that you may have had issues at your current firm or be losing your job. And there's nothing wrong with losing a job. And frankly, most attorneys lose jobs at some point in their career. Remember that most law firms have a choice of who to hire. And when law firms let people go, they do whatever they can to hold on to the most valuable people, but they will let people go that don't necessarily meet with their expectations. There's an interesting book that just came out by Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix. And he talks about in his book that, that in 2001 or something like, or 1999, I don't remember, or 2002, maybe there was a big .com bust. I think that was in 2000. So he had to lay off 30% of his staff, and they let the people go that they perceive were making the most problems and creating the most issues. When they let those people go, the productivity of the company and how well things were doing, and everyone was actually much happier. So the point is that sometimes low performers can drag everyone down, and that's a problem. And that's something that employers, if they feel like you're too eager to start, they feel like you could be a low performer. There's all sorts of reasons that you could lose a job, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's you, but you just need to be cognizant of the way that law firms are thinking. And if you appear too eager to get a position, they're also going to lose interest. They want to feel like they're chasing you and they're getting something special. And that's something that all law firms want. They want to feel like they're desirable and they got something that was very difficult to get if they hire you and that sort of. Okay, so another big one is questions about doing other types of work than you're being interviewed for. So when the corporate market is slow and people that are corporate attorneys may want to go into litigation, or litigators may want to go into corporate when the corporate market's doing well, or corporate attorneys may get interested. They may know a friend that went into in-house that did data privacy and got this great job. Then they decide they want to do IP or data privacy work. And so people will always go into interviews a lot of times with other objectives and doing what they're being interviewed for. It's not a good idea. Employers are hiring you to do one thing that's on your resume. If they want to hire a different type of attorney, they will go after and advertise for that different type of attorney. And this is something you need to remember. You can't reasonably expect most employers to hire you just because you have good law firm experience or you went to a good law school if you want to switch practice areas. That's insane. Think about it from the employer's point of view. Typically, when people switch practice areas, they're going to have issues with a new practice area too. So it's just not good. So in 1999, when the .com boom was taken up, I was a litigator and I was interviewing with law firms. People with corporate experience, there were these stories like in the legal newspapers every day about people getting stock options and becoming millionaires. There was just tons and tons of news out there about this. And it was something that I also wanted to be part of. So I decided that I also wanted to get corporate work. And then I'd even developed corporate business. I had, 3 or 4 good size, not good size, but I was generating much more than my salary in work in business. I thought I could take that to a new firm. But when I asked about this, the law firms realized it wouldn't be smart to hire me because I'm a litigator. Why would you hire a litigator who's got all these corporate clients doing corporate work? It didn't make any sense. So you can't do the job. Anytime I brought that, the fact that I wanted to do corporate work, law firms just weren't interested. Employers employers that have openings need a certain type of attorney. So if a law firm's interviewing you to be corporate attorney, that's what you need to be. If the law firm's interviewing you to be a litigator, they don't want to hear about you wanting to do corporate work. And a lot of attorneys will go out on interviews and they'll ask questions about doing other types of work. That just doesn't work. You can't do that. So you'll disqualify yourself. And it's not a good idea. And people do it all the time. And you have to get into a firm and establish yourself and then try to get other types of work in most cases before they will hire you. I have seen firms hire people in different practice areas before, but it's very rare. I had one guy that I was working with not too long ago that was first in his class and a good law school and wanted to switch practice areas and no one would talk to him. And this was before I got involved. But when I got involved, I was only able to get him interest from a couple firms and they weren't even in the same state. So it's just firms, just because you're a good student or you went to a good law school or you're working at a good firm, if you want to switch practice areas or do something or do other types of work, they're not going to be interested in you. Another question that's bad to ask is questions that show you don't want to do a certain type of work. Some examples of these would be if a law firm talks about that it has a big document review it's doing, and someone asks, do you use contract attorneys to do document reviews? You shouldn't care how they get the document reviews done when you're interviewing. That's their business. And if they want to charge out your rates to the clients willing to pay for it, then that's fine. I was talking to an attorney that was a senior associate at a major firm making, God, at least $400,000 a year. And he was doing document reviews. And that's because the client wanted it. The client, I think, was Volkswagen. The client wanted major attorneys doing very, serious attorneys doing these document reviews. And that was their call. It wasn't the attorney's call who did them. Another question would be, do you use junior attorneys to do discovery work? Another question might be, would I be able to run my own deals or do depositions and trials? And I'm bringing up litigation, and there's equivalence in every single practice area out there, regardless of what practice area you're in. I'm sure there's lots of types of work that are going to be primarily done by young attorneys, but you shouldn't asking those kind of questions will show a potential unwillingness. And law firms want to give people work that'll do it. A lot of times attorneys will want immediate responsibility, and they'll complain that they're leaving the firm because they're not getting a certain type of responsibility. And litigators will say, I haven't gotten a chance to do trials, or they'll say, I am not getting depositions, or they'll say, corporate attorneys will say that I'm doing, work that's beneath me. Frankly, I've worked with litigation partners in major law firms, the biggest law firms, the 10 largest, law firms in the country, and they've never done a trial. It's just having these demands and so forth is not necessarily going to serve you all the time. So you need to be careful with that. Another thing is most law firms, they do expect you to pitch in and do whatever's required to get work done for the clients, regardless of whether you want to do it. So if you start asking questions that may indicate you're not interested in doing certain types of work, this is going to turn off clients very quickly, employers very quickly. Legal employers, they want to hire people that are going to do the work, just get it done and not complain about it. And I've worked with so many attorneys in the past that, and our recruiters do too, that have been angry that they're not getting assignments and work they feel that's beneath them. And if you're unwilling to do the work you're given, you're just not going to be a good hire. You need to be doing every type of work that you're given. Another type of question, of course, is questions that show you might be nervous doing a certain type of work. So some examples of this would be, do I have to ask clients? Do I need to go to court? And there's all sorts of work and assignments that attorneys may be nervous about doing. And if you come across as having any reservations about doing a certain type of work, the law firm is simply going to find someone that doesn't have the same reservations about doing that kind of work. That's just what it is. You can't act scared to do certain types of work. You have to be the soldier that's told to charge into the people firing at them. You can't hold back. And the second you look weak, the law firm's just going to move on and hire someone that's not. You have to be very careful. Another type of question that people ask is ones that show that they haven't read the firm's website or publicly related information about the firm. And some questions might be, what type of transactions have you worked on? How many attorneys are in a certain practice area? And attorneys will ask questions like this all the time. And these sorts of questions will show that they didn't do their homework and that maybe the job's not important enough to them, or maybe they won't do the homework when they get assignments from other people as well. If you're not prepared for an interview, it indicates you're probably not going to be preparing for important client matters either. And the law firm's not going to like that. Another type of question that people ask are travel questions. And those are, will I be expected to travel? How often do attorneys travel? And there's nothing wrong with it. A lot of people have kids at home and cannot travel. Some people just don't like to travel. But this is an important component of jobs at many law firms. There's all sorts of attorneys that hate traveling. They need to be able to send people out to travel. And if you can't travel, you just can't do the job. It's as simple as that. So you shouldn't be asking questions about travel. And if you do ask questions about travel, you should act like you like travel, because you just don't know where they're coming from. Another question is about reviews. The problem with asking questions about reviews is that it shows that you may have concerns about getting reviews. And if someone has concerns about reviews, then the employer may assume that they've had negative reviews in the past. Another thing is that they may a lot of times there's a perception that once you get a review, you're going to get a raise. And so then they'll, have questions about that could be saying how often you get raises. It's not the sort of thing you should be talking about in an interview. Other types of questions are ones that show you may not have been listening. Sometimes I've been in interviews before. I was being interviewed for this not too long ago, not a job, and someone was droning on and on. They talked for 40 minutes about something. I don't even know what it was about. It was very difficult, following them at some point because it just went so far off in a tangent. But the problem is I had to keep listening. And so you have to keep listening in interviews, even if what the person's saying seems boring. So you just have to do that. And if you ask questions in interviews about topics that may have already been covered in an answer, this is just going to hurt you. The interview will assume you're not interested in the position or not focused, and that's not going to work. Questions about references, those are also bad. Some questions are like, would you like to see references? Do you check references? And it's the employer's responsibility to ask about references. And if you're mentioning this, in most instances, you're taking control of something that the employer should have control over. The employer should be the one that asks you for references. And it'll also bring the attention to the fact that you feel you may need these for some reason, like the interview's not going well. You just do not want to ask about references in interviews. Another type of question that people ask is whether or not there's people there to help them with aspects of the job they may not be good at. I had one guy that was losing his job because he didn't proofread his work and was turning in sloppy assignments. And that's actually okay in some law firms, and some types of law firms are very consumer facing and have to keep their rates low and so forth. That's okay. But this guy was at a major firm. And so he would go into interviews and he would ask if they had people that could proofread his work. And that really turned law firms off very quickly. Once he fixed his writing and everything and started proofreading stuff, he got much better. But it just shows you might be an issue. Another big one is questions about pro bono and other activities unrelated to the firm making money. Some questions would be, how much pro bono can attorneys do? If I go get an LLM, will the law firm reimburse this? And the thing to understand is law firms need people that can do the work. And if you're asking questions that show you have an interest in doing things not related to legal work, they're not going to like you, and they're just not going to like it. And they're going to assume that you can't do the job. They need people to do the work. Now, there's nothing wrong with doing pro bono work, of course, but that's not something you should be bringing up at the interview stage. Okay, so the second one is questions that show you can't be managed. And these are fairly important. So being managed basically means that you're not going to follow directions, respect the people giving you work, and you're going to do what's asked of you. In my personal experience, this is one of the most problematic things of hiring people. If you hire people that can't be managed, then those people they tend to drive everyone down. They create a lower level of functioning in the organization, because if the law firm's not coming down and people that are being managed, then it hurts everyone. And most law firms are not going to be interested in hiring people that can not be managed. And this is one of the main reasons people do not get the positions they're applying for. It's also one of the main reasons that people are fired from law firms. It's a huge problem. Being managed basically means you're part of a team. If you're going to work for a law firm, you need to be part of a team. Law firms need people that are able to be managed. If one person resents being managed and is not being managed, then everybody else thinks they can get away with that sort of behavior. It's just not good. I run against this on a constant basis in my job. It's difficult. I don't like having to be the bad guy and manage people, but that's the job. That's the job of running a law firm or any business. To run a law firm and get work done and to grow, law firms do not want to hire people who aren't following directions, who are creating issues with the firm or upsetting other people. Who can't be managed or problematic. So law firms just avoid them. And with good reason, they have to. So this particular thing is among the most important, and you need to think about the sort of questions you're asking when you're in an interview. But here are some examples. There's some people that may ask questions to indicate they think they're better than the job they're applying for. So some of these questions may be things like, how long will I have to do this work until I get to work on larger matters? How soon can I get trial experience? Just things along those lines. Anytime you ask word questions, and this is related to some of the previous questions, but these will show you can't be managed and may be an issue, because if you're asking that, then you will use that as something to get mad about in the future. Questions about support staff you'll have access to can show management problems, such as your own secretary or the word processing department. And people that ask about support and people that will be able to help them do their jobs typically will have a difficult time being managed. That's just how that kind of works. The big one that I see a lot of, and I don't know why people do this, but some people do, is questions about negative things in the firm's history or online reviews. Some people will say things like, I read the firm got a bad review in diversity. What do you think about that? Or how do you think the fact that several partners have left recently affects the firm's future? Anytime you're focusing on negative things about the firm, it's just going to show you're difficult to manage. Every firm has bad reviews. Every firm fires people and those people get mad and they write bad reviews. It's just what it is. And or clients get mad or people don't fit in. And typically when someone's tough to manage, they're the ones that will write bad reviews and so forth. And that just hurts the firm. If you're going to come across as being overly vulnerable to others' opinions, then it's just going to show you're difficult to manage. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't read reviews, because obviously there's some truth to everything. And if the firm upsets someone, then maybe the firm didn't handle things. So there's definitely reasons to be concerned. But you really want to get the job first, and then you want to see who you'd be working for. Is people will read a bad review about one law firm and assume that the whole firm's like that, when you might just be working with one or two attorneys there in a different practice group. So it's not something you should really be that concerned about, and you can ask questions about it after you're hired. Other things about the firms do not like, and I'm not saying that they necessarily dislike them, but they're things that may create issues sometimes, and not with all firms, with some firms. And I'm just bringing this up because I want you to get jobs, and I'm not trying to upset anyone. But asking questions about various accommodations can hurt. Asking about leaving early on different days, I mean, that you can ask about, that's actually okay, but you probably want to wait until you get hired to ask it. I've never seen a firm have a problem with someone leaving early on the Sabbath or something like that. I just haven't. But asking about an interview, it's just, why bring it up now? You can bring it up after you get an offer. Asking questions about, can you have an office on the ground floor, especially if the firm doesn't have an office on the ground floor. These are all things that the law firms are obligated to provide, but you just don't want to give law firms any reasons to distinguish you in any form of negative way from other people that may make it seem like it's difficult to manage. They all have to do these things, but just don't create any issues until you get an offer. That's my advice. Don't draw attention to the special things that you need or anything. Just don't draw attention to it. Your objective is to get a job. There's nothing wrong with any of this. I hired a guy once, I remember, in our Chicago office that legitimately could not walk upstairs. And he even couldn't come into the office to interview because he had a back problem. And I still hired him, but I wasn't doing him any favors. He was very qualified, but he made it very difficult. And it would have been better if we just, were able to interview without all that. And he ended up being very good at his job. So there's nothing wrong with any of this stuff. You just need to be careful. A question about your office. Bad questions include, well, I have my own office. Where will my office be located? First of all, these questions are presumptuous, but then you're just showing that these things are important to you. Law firms run into people quitting over offices all the time, believe it or not. People get mad that they don't have a good office, or they have the wrong office and they don't like it. And there's no reason. There's all sorts of tension about offices, and so you just shouldn't ask about it. If it's important to you, the law firm will think that it could be tension in the future and they don't want to have it, and may show you could be a management problem. Questions about management. How's the firm managed? How are decisions made in the firm? Those are big ones. It shouldn't be your concern, really, when you're interviewing. It may not even be something that you should be worrying about after years of working at a law firm. Some attorneys will join a law firm out of law school and stay there until they retire and never have anything to do with management at all. And if you're worried about it, especially as an associate, it's not something that's really going to go over all that. Questions about the personal life of your interviewer is a big one. Asking the interviewer what they like to do in their free time, asking them about kids, all that kind of stuff is just not a good idea. You have to observe protocol, meaning they can ask you whatever they want about your personal life, really, if they want, not within reason, and ask you certain legal questions about being married and so forth, but they certainly can ask you certain questions about your hobbies and things, but you really shouldn't be asking those questions. That's the interviewer's domain. Questions about parking. Hate to bring it up. Does the firm pay for parking? Where do associates park? I've seen people leave very good jobs in major law firms because of parking issues. As crazy as that sounds, so it's just not something you should ask about. really should be the least of your concerns. If the law firm sees you asking that, then they think you could leave for trivial reasons. It's also a presumptuous question, like you're already working there. Questions about benefits are bad. Asking about health insurance or dental and vision insurance, 401k contributions. You should allow all those questions to be answered after you get an offer. Your emphasis really in your questions, and this is the first time I've said this, but it's one of the most important things, should be on doing the work. How do you get the work done? What does a good job look like to you? And this sorts of things. You need to be talking about that. Questions about client contact, going on pitches, and related things are also a big one. Bad questions will be things like, will I have to go on pitches? Will I be able to go on pitches? How much client contact can I expect? People leave for these reasons as well. And these are the sorts of questions that you need to ask after you're hired, not before. Questions about the stability of the employer are also a big one. Questions about that would be things like, how stable is a practice group? I heard there were layoffs a few years ago. That puts things in a negative light, and employers do not want to hear that. Every law firm goes through ups and downs. It's just politicians are in one day, they're out the next, they're back. Actors, actresses, businesses is the same thing. If you look at the stock market, the stock's up and it's down and it's up. If a law firm perceives you're going to leave when things are down, they're just going to be less likely to hire you. So it's just something we need to stay away from. I touched on this earlier, but questions about support staff, just not a good idea. What's the quality of the support staff? Do you think the support staff is happy? Lawyers also leave because of support staff or cite that as reasons for that. If a law firm wants to cut corners and hire inexpensive support staff, or they're attorneys, they're more used to managing the legal work and maybe not their support staff, you just don't know. You have to be careful with those questions as well. And one of the biggest ones I think that people blow it on all the time are questions about controversial political, social, religious, and other topics. Honestly, there's a lot of attorneys that don't understand the history of the country and the things that people have gone through in terms of portraying of women, various groups, religious groups, and different sexual orientations. And so people are scared about it, and law firms are scared about it, and with good reason in a lot of cases. You need to be very careful about bringing this stuff up just because it can frighten firms. Most law firms, almost every law firm that's more than 50 people, has been sued for some discrimination related issue or is still being sued. And if you introduce this stuff into discussion, it can be taken the wrong way. I've certainly written I've written a book about race in law firms, and I've written lots of articles about different things, and people will take that stuff out of context basically to promote other recruiting firms. But you just have to be very careful. It's stuff you just don't really want to talk about. And if law firms want to bring up this kind of stuff, you can allow them to, and at least you're not getting an offer. And in this day and age, honestly, most attorneys that are interviewing are very tolerant of other groups, I think. But you just need to be careful. It's just the way the society is at this point. Questions about perks, such as car services, people to run errands, and that sort of thing are also a bad idea. If you're asking about these kind of things, the law firm will think that they're important to you. And if they're important to you, then you could be alert away from someone offering those. So those are the big management questions. And management's very important. You just have to remember when you go into an interview, you want to think, how do I look like I want to do the job, that I'm going to stick around, and that sort of thing. And I'll follow what the law firm's asking me to do, because if you're not, it just creates problems for everyone. And people that are out there doing their own thing and not willing to take direction and not willing to be managed really can hold people back. Despite any particular individual's performance, if they're not willing to be managed, then they're really holding the whole team back, and that's not good. Law firms don't want to hear about that. A big one, this is the third one, is questions that show you will not do the job long term. And it was interesting to me, I remember, and I tell this example a lot, but early in my career running BCG Attorney Search, I hired 2 recruiters. This was in a long time ago, over 20 years ago, but the first one had been at her previous job for 8 years, and the other one had been at her previous job for 17 years. The one who lasted 8 years in her previous job stayed 10 years, and the one who'd lasted 17 years in her previous job lasted 18 years. So there's certain people that just, when they go into a job, they commit. They put their head down, they work, they don't get distracted by things like online reviews, perks, benefits, parking, whatever, and they just do the job. And there's people like that. And those are the people that employers want to hire. They really do. And after those two recruiters in the interim, there were so many people that came along that were good enough recruiters, but they just didn't want to be managed. And they found issues to constantly be upset about. They couldn't commit. And I noticed that if someone had stayed in their previous job for 2 years, they'd stay with me for one to 3 years. There were people that would stay shorter or longer. And law firms just want you to stay. They want to make a good decision. And making a good decision means hiring someone that's likely to stick around. If they're hiring someone that's not likely to stick around, what that shows that you potentially could be weakening the whole tribe. Because every time someone leaves, it gives a little bit of a hit to the morale of the people that are there till the law, and then the law firm rebuilds and or builds more people up and so forth. But the law firms typically want people to stay, and you need to be careful about that. So questions about raises, bonuses, and other financial things are a big one. People asking questions about how bonuses are calculated, business development budgets, things like that. And there's reasons to ask that. And obviously compensation is very important. But I see all the time, I see people like refuse to go on interviews and refuse to even apply to certain firms until the law firm will tell them what the salary and bonuses would be. And that's insane. You need to make sure that you're doing everything within your power to get the job. And you need to be focused, by the way, especially if you're a young associate or a law student or getting experience. You're talking about a career that could be, I've seen attorneys that start practicing at 24 and 25 and have been practicing in their early 90s. So you're talking about a career of 60 plus years. And you need to get experience when you're young. And that's really important. So if you're focusing on money, like any money you make now is really meaningless to your long-term career. And if you're asking a lot of questions about money early on, it's just going to show that you'll probably leave for money and so forth. And that's dangerous to that. And obviously you're going to take the best offers and so forth. And that's going to be a calculation to your decision, but you want to make sure you're careful with that. Other questions that may indicate you may not stay will be ones related to maybe a need for immediate responsibility. People will ask questions like, how soon can I take depositions? Will I get to do my own deals? And those sorts of things. If someone that's hungry for immediate responsibility doesn't get it, they'll likely leave. Just anytime you think about interviewing, and I'm just talking about getting the job. Your objective is to get the job. Just think of yourself as a soldier. You're going to go in there, you're going to stick around, you're going to be a team player and so forth. And people, by the way, that aren't team players and don't stick around a long time, typically the way their careers end up looking is, and I'm going to say this once, and if you hear one thing today, and learn from this, I hope you do. People that bounce around between employers earlier in their career, like they become toxic, like they become like radioactive. Like people, if they see you bouncing around, like they know you're not going to stick around. So why would someone hire you? The type of employers will hire you because they're very weak or there's something wrong with them. But employers do not want to, you need to be very careful anytime, and I'm saying this as a recruiter, by the way, who makes a living placing people. But you need to be careful, like leaving and not sticking around for inconsequential reasons. Now, moving up to a better firm with more responsibility, with better people and where you're more comfortable, there's all sorts of great reasons for moving. But you just need to be very careful about that, because people that stick around have better careers. People that leave for inconsequential reasons typically do so again and again, and it's problematic for them. Hurts them in the long run. Now, not always, but a lot. The questions about partnership potential, this would be for associates or contract partners hired. How soon am I going to be evaluated? How many people make partner each year? What is the fastest way? Can you move up? How quickly be considered for partnership after 1 year or two? Those sorts of questions are things that people ask, and probably not a good idea. When you ask those sorts of questions, you're showing that if you don't make partner after 1 year or two, or that all these things, that you're in a rush and so forth. And law firms want to be in control. They'll make you partner when they think when it's best for them and you, and they really have no choice. Questions about maternity leave, paternity leave, and vacations. Asking about maternity leave and paternity leave is typically just not something that you want to do. Law firms will have their policies. In most cases, they're public for large law firms. For smaller ones, they're not. Asking about paternity leave in an interview for men is always a bad idea. I don't think there's any reason it just doesn't go over well. I've seen people do it. It's just not a good idea. And the other thing is maternity leave. It just anything that shows the employer that you may, have to interrupt your work and so forth. It's just not the kind of stuff you want to ask about in an interview. These are all legitimate concerns that you should have. There's nothing wrong with this. But if you ask about it in an interview, employers don't like it. Questions about people that are no longer there, who move to other firms. That's also not a great idea. So some examples would be, where do people go to work after working here, and that sort of thing. If you ask about that, law firms are not going to be that happy. The reason is because you're just reminding them of people that there might have been issues with and so forth in the past. Questions that may show low energy and enthusiasm for the job. Those could be things like just flat nonsense questions that are just filler, that don't really have to do with anything, that show you can't make a connection with the firm or the interviewer, and questions that make it obvious that you may not like the firm or the job in the long run, and that sort of thing. It's just, you need to be able to connect with an interviewer. And so anytime you have low energy, low enthusiasm questions, that's not a good idea. And the final category of questions, and then we'll be done, and then we'll go to questions, is questions that make people do. All these three things, like, can you do the job? Like, a lot of times people will think that's the most important thing, and it is important, but your resume typically will explain that. Questions about being managed that show management are important, and then questions that show whether or not you're going to be around long term. But really what happens is that the people that do the best are able to and get the most jobs are really the most likable. Like, the law firm will overlook different things if they like you a lot many times. And this is one of the secrets that our recruiters at BCG Attorney Search do very well, is we're able to draw out, and we ask a lot of questions of our candidates. We have profiles they fill out and so forth, and then we present them and make them very likable in ways that they necessarily couldn't do themselves. And anytime you're interviewing with a law firm, the people are always wondering, is this person going to be my friend, or are they going to be my enemy? And are they going to support me, and are they going to support the company? And that's very important. You need to really think about this, showing that any type of question that makes people not like you is really could seriously backfire. So I mentioned this earlier, but asking questions about attorneys in the firm that others may not like, or one's no longer there, you just need to be careful. Anytime you may be considered friends with someone that the law firm doesn't like or so forth, is just, you don't want to be associated with those sorts of feelings. Asking an attorney if so-and-so is their client can upset them. If it's not the attorney's client, they're a service partner, it can sometimes rub them the wrong way. They may resent that it's not their client. You just never know. It's not a huge question, but I've just seen in my experience that turned people off. Questions about other attorneys in the office seem off. In every firm, there's going to be people that are a little weird, so you need to be careful. If you ask about them, it's going to show that potentially come there and make fun of people, and you do the same thing with other people, so they don't like that. The big one that I heard a lot of people is questions that may show they come from a privileged heart. Most attorneys are fairly middle class or grew up that way. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing this kind of work for the most part. And so they tend not to be people that may have played squash growing up and that sort of thing, or were real into riding dressage or horses and so forth, or taking vacations. At least anything that shows you come from that background may make people not like you. So you need to be careful. Other things that may not make them like you would be things about going out for work to bars and other establishments. The problem is, these questions may not seem like a big deal, and in reality, I don't really think they are either, but it's just some people may not be part of those things. And there's groups in every law firm that go out and they don't bring people with them, and those people feel left out. And so imagine if someone asks you in an interview, do people go out after work? They're immediately going to assume that you'll be part of that group, and they're not part of that group for whatever reason. And so they may think this person's going to be part of that group and not me, and not like you. And honestly, it sounds like a stupid thing, but I've seen that hurt people before too. So you just need to be careful. Asking any type of question about the interviewer's background, racial, sexual, and so forth is probably not a good idea. Anything that does that, people just don't want to talk about this a lot of times in interviews. You need to just avoid any type of friction or any type of thing that is going to come on that hurt you there. Other questions would be questions about where the interviewer lives. Some people feel self-conscious and don't like where they live. Other people feel guilty about where they live. In different metropolitan areas, it can connote what you're like religiously, ethnically, or even sexually. So like in Los Angeles, West Hollywood is a fairly gay area, and like Fairfax is Jewish, and Beverly Hills is Persian. And you just stay away from those areas. Asking people where they live many times can connote various things. And I actually had one attorney that was interesting. When I was writing the book about race and ethnicity inside of law firms, I had one attorney tell me that everybody in his firm that was white lived in one area, and there was only a couple of black people and that lived in this other area town. And because of that, they didn't get to mix with clients or weren't able to bring them business. I mean, I don't know, but these are just loaded questions, and you just need to be really careful. Questions about whether or not the interviewer has kids. Many people are uncomfortable talking about this information in interviews. Older people that don't have kids may be uncomfortable if they don't have kids. Younger people, you just need to avoid these type of questions. Questions about fraternities, law review, knew someone in law school, and those sorts of questions can also be loaded. They can alienate the interviewer. It may make them feel bad or remind them of someone they didn't know that they didn't like. And you just need to be careful. I remember there's a very well-known attorney that was blackballed at my fraternity when I was in college, and it was very well known. It's really, I don't know why they blackballed him, but if someone were to ask him if he was a fraternity in college, I think that would probably upset him quite a bit. And he's a formidable attorney. So you just need to be careful with that sort of stuff. Questions about when the interviewer graduated from college or law school. This is basically asking the person their age. Young and old alike can be very self-conscious about their age. You need to be careful of that. I already brought this up, but questions about negative reviews of the law firm online. No one wants to have to justify something negative. It also just associates you with a negative question, so you need to be careful about that. And then asking an attorney about why they may have left their last law firm. They talk about where they worked before. Can also bring up negative feelings in the interview. These are just the wrong questions that you don't want to ask. And I certainly can go into a lot more detail about them. And if you have any more questions about them, I will be back. I'm just going to grab some more coffee in maybe 1 or 2 minutes and just start. You can ask as many questions as you want, and whether it's about today or anything else, and we'll go from there. Thanks. All right, so let me go to questions. Give me 1 second. All right, so let's see here. Okay, so the first question is, I graduated from law school in 2017. I took the bar, passed it on my first try, and I've had and lost 2 jobs since then. The first only lasted for 3 months, after which I burned out. The second lasted for 1 month and fell apart because of COVID-19 and court shutdowns. I was recently diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and feel very much uncertain about what to do. I've given up on being picky about what type of job I'm searching for and have been applying for literally everything that I can find for quite some time now. I feel somewhat lost and adrift and have no clue what to do exactly. Vague as this may be, do you have any advice? Wow. Yeah, that's a good question. The first thing is I don't know enough about MS to really advise. I don't know what you're capable of. And that I think is a good, and I don't know, I certainly know people that have had the disease before and lived a very long time, but I don't know how that could impact everything. If you were burned out after your first 3-month job, my thought maybe that may have been because of how you were impacted by the disease, but I don't know. And then only getting 1 month of experience obviously is not a good thing. I've seen lots of attorneys with very serious handicaps get jobs, and many times those jobs are not with private law firms. The reason is because clients can be very demanding, it's hard to get paid, and all sorts of things, but they could be. Other times, I've seen attorneys with very serious handicaps, including being blind, deaf, numerous ones with wheelchairs and so forth, that work in law firms. So I don't know how the disease impacts you, but you need to probably expand your horizons, and you can do that in a couple of different ways. One would be applying to smaller firms, offering to help solo practitioners, offering to help working in markets outside of where you live. Certainly, you always have the option of working on your own. That's one way. And then the other thing too is there's lots of government positions that are very good about not allowing, but actually encourage people with different handicaps and sicknesses, illnesses and so forth to work there. So I think that that's something that I would recommend. If not, I don't think you'll have any problem getting something. I just think you need to look at a lot of different things. I don't know that, what happened in your job, but I would continue looking. I would also, there's a good book by Seth Godin, I forget to pronounce the name, but talks about something about the peak and when to continue doing something, when to quit. If you went to law school, there's obviously stuff that you're good at, and it may be math or writing, or I don't know what it is. But many times if the doors aren't opening for you, and 3 years is a while for the door to open, then maybe you have skills that would better apply elsewhere. For me personally, like, I think a much higher and better use of what I do is doing what I do for a living as opposed to practicing law. But I could be wrong. I certainly could be wrong. I may have been able to help bigger companies or groups practicing law. I don't know. You always need to ask yourself, what is the highest and best use of your skills? I would also do something called take a DISC profile, which is DISC, and that can help you understand where your skills and interests lie. You may just find out that you're not suited to practicing law, or that you are. And if you are, then you should be doing it. But I've often found that if you really have done everything, doing everything, by the way, means applying everywhere. In Los Angeles, in New York City, for example, there's 5,000 or 6,000 law firms. Have you applied to all of them? And do you really want to work there or work in a law firm? Have you applied to every potential law firm you can? You need to realize too, when you're applying to jobs, and this is for everybody, if you're applying to openings, every firm that you're applying to is getting lots of applicants. So are you the best applicant? Many times the best way to find a job is not to apply to places that are getting applicants. It's to, find smaller employers that have openings or needs. Meaning, I've hired people before that have just walked right into my office and asked for a job. That can work. So I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but you need to get out and network. You need to do all sorts of things. And I think your question, the reason I'm spending so much time on it, is because I know a lot of people have something similar. You may have been laid off. You may not be making as much money as you would like to. You may be frustrated. I was reading or heard actually on television last night, which you may have seen the same show I did, that alcohol use has gone up, divorce has gone up, drug use has gone up, crimes. So when the economy is not great and people are having a hard time working, all sorts of bad things happen. I very much, I'm sorry about what you're facing, but you also need to ask yourself if you're doing the right job. Lots of places, like businesses, have been founded by attorneys that failed the bar numerous times, couldn't pass the bar, and you didn't have that problem. But there's all sorts of things that you possibly could do. You could also represent people that have been lost jobs because of multiple sclerosis and make that. There's all sorts of things that you could do. So I hope that helps. If you want to ask a follow-up question, I'm happy to answer it later. But I like that question. Thank you. Harrison, I'm looking to go from a partner in a law firm in Maine to a position involving trial work in a large city. I have my resume already drafted, but I'm looking for someone to format. Any thoughts? Also, I think I need to include major case victories, meaning it will be more than one page. Thoughts on that? Thank you so much. Yeah, so one of the things I recommend for all corporate attorneys, and actually for litigators too, but most litigators don't do it, is that you can format your resume, or not format, but you can add like a sheet at the end. So you have your resume be one page, and some resumes are longer, but I really don't recommend it. And then you have representative cases or something, and you put that as a second page at the end of your resume. And then corporate attorneys will do representative transactions, patent attorneys can do representative patents, and so on. Real estate attorneys can do representative transactions. So doing that is actually good. I like it when people do that because it shows a lot of enthusiasm for the work, and it's very useful. I've actually seen, I was working with a partner in Maine not too long ago that wanted to move from Maine too. I guess he said it was very depressed there and he didn't like the winters and some of the things. And I ended up getting him a few jobs. I think he ended up working for one of us, didn't take a job that I got him. But anyway, he was able to find jobs. You can do that, but I would recommend not putting your trial victories and so forth in the actual experience section. I recommend creating a second page. And Law Crossing has a resume facelift service you can use. I pointed this webinar not to sell services, but that's one of our companies, and they can help you with the formatting if you like to do that. Okay, I really enjoyed your article. Should you start your own law firm? Top 10 reasons to start or not start your own law firm. I'm a Saudi national working with a very big U.S. law firm, but considering to go on my own. Thoughts? No, I don't have any thoughts. You can certainly ask a follow-up question. but I don't know anything. I've placed people in Saudi Arabia, American attorneys, but I don't know about what it is like running a law firm in Saudi Arabia or working in a law firm in Saudi Arabia, or how that would work over there if you wanted to start something in Saudi Arabia. But yeah, but if you want to ask a follow-up question in a little more detail, I'm happy to ask that. Okay. An attorney firm wants me to screen their inquiries and develop a file for their consideration to take on a case. They do advertising and I take the calls. I'm not an attorney. I do not give advice. I only ask questions, note them, and hand the lead sheet to the attorney. I get paid a salary by the attorney. My question is, why can't I do this on my own? Advertise, screen, and sell the file lead to an attorney. Thank you. I don't want to get in trouble here, but I do know of non-attorneys that do this. There's a whole business, and I don't know if it's legal or not. So I'm just going to completely this is not, I can't give legal advice, but you certainly can screen self. Actually, I think in order to get, I think you can get paid for leads. I don't think you can get share fees. So I think you can actually get paid for leads if you're not an attorney. There's a whole business that does that. They generate the leads online and they sell them to other people. And so that may be something you can do. I'm not 100% positive, but yeah, that's something you could do. Okay, but again, I don't know if it's legal. I have 30 years experience as an attorney, as a business and real estate lawyer, 5 of which were in a named regional firm in San Diego, 5 of which were in-house with a small San Diego real estate developer as a general counsel many years ago, and the last 20 in solo private practice. I am 57 and will work until 70. Okay, that's good. My goal is to go back in-house with a mid-sized company, real estate or otherwise, with a $250,000 annual salary to finish out my career. Question: should I get my MBA from a Pac-10 major university, Arizona State, to enhance my marketability for GC position? About $100,000 in tuition and lots of work, so it's a big decision. No, I don't think getting at 57, I don't know that, unless you'd like to, I don't know that getting an MBA is going to really help you very much. I think that your legal skills are what they are, and you're probably you can still get much better at being an attorney at 57. I think that getting a job with a real estate company probably would not be that difficult at the age of 57 and with all your experience. So I don't really think, I think what I would do would be just apply to developers. I know that there's lots of developers who need people like you. So I honestly would not worry about any of this, too much. I really wouldn't. I don't think you're going to have too much trouble finding something, especially in San Diego or Orange County, if that's where you want to be. But I don't know that getting an MBA makes sense. I think if anything, taking time off from work and getting an MBA would actually hurt your legal abilities and probably be a bad idea. But that's my opinion. Okay, I'm writing to you about your post about why people should and should not quit the practice of law, specifically the one entitled Why You Should Quit the Practice of Law. In the post, you provided 7 questions to check if somebody's right for the profession. I used to be able to answer most of those questions with a yes, but lately I can't. I think there are a few reasons. First, it seemed like most of the people I worked for didn't really care about their clients, so why should I? Okay. Second, I worked in the plaintiff side, and it seemed like some of the clients felt entitled to more than they deserved. Okay. I don't mind working 18 hours for clients who have suffered real injustice, but I think those cases are few and far between. How can I tell if I've just had a bad experience or if I really just don't care anymore? Have you seen others in my situation? Any insight would be appreciated. This reminds me of, I remember my asphalt business years ago, I had a client and he had someone living in his house, and the guy was in his late 40s and had never been married. And the reason he had never got married was because he could never stay loyal to one person. He would always stray off, and he would say, if I don't stray, then she'll do it. And so why not? Who knows? But the point is that some people, just because other people are don't care about their clients and motivated by money, doesn't mean you have to be too. You may just have worked with the wrong people. And so there's another article I wrote called something about finding your tribe, and that may be a good one to do. And you're right. I know a lot of people file lawsuits when nothing bad has happened, and they try to collect money from those. There's a lot of bad people out there. There's people that don't care about their jobs and helping the people, and there's also people that try to hurt other people unjustly. You're right. In my opinion, you just found the wrong people to work with. So if it was me, I certainly would not give up. Not all this work is bad. I know some very good plaintiffs' attorneys that do good work, but you have to come at things from the right people or approach. You also need to And also a lot of times this has to do with the area of the country you live in. And some big cities and stuff, people can be a little bit more dishonest than in other parts of the country. So I would. Okay, next question. And as many questions as anyone has, if you just keep asking them, I'll answer them as long as anybody wants. I graduated 17 years ago and did not pass the bar. I went into education, which has been good, but I need to get rid of school loans. I never thought about taking it in an easier state. What advice would you give for help in this area? Because I want to do legal work and make more money. Would in-house counsel take an older JD grad? Should I attempt to take the bar exam again after it's been too long? My biggest piece of advice to you is that you shouldn't be practicing law because of the money. I think that a lot of people make that mistake. You need to, unless there's something particular about the law that's interested to you. There are states that are easier to pass the bar than others, so I would research that. That's actually a good question. If it was me, I would certainly take the bar and pass just so you have it. But I don't know. And then you can work in-house. But in order to work in-house, you need to have some sort of training. And the problem is when you get older, and I guess you're probably not that old. I think you're in your 30s or something, or early 40s. That's not old. It can be harder to get into something. But yes, in-house counsel will take older JD grads. You also want to make sure that you're doing something that you'll be good at and you'll enjoy. And so my advice would be to take the bar and certainly apply to jobs. And you can apply all over the country, I think, to in-house jobs if you have something. But you need to have something that kind of sets you apart, that makes you a reason. You could go into education law. You could do all sorts of different things that may be good. And then maybe that's what you want to do. The only other thing I would say is, and I know a lot of people, especially in California, like the bar exams are very difficult and lots of people fail and they give up. You should never give up. If you didn't pass the bar, there's no reason to give up. You just need to study harder the next time. Anybody can pass the bar if they apply themselves enough, and because it's more, and so I would do that. But yes, in-house counsel would take a JD grad, so would law firms. But you need to position yourself and think about why you want to do something, where you want to do it, how you want to do it, and prepare yourself for it. Okay, I recently just graduated from law school and decided to finish up my science credits to be able to take the patent bar. Even though I took intellectual property classes during law school, getting an internship in that field was not easy. Since I was in Michigan, and with the automotive industry being the one looking for IP attorneys, most of them wanted engineering degrees, which I didn't have. I'm planning on taking the February bar in Texas and the patent bar maybe in April so I can prepare. How do I get in this field? I've even emailed firms applying to be a paralegal legal experience just to get some experience. Okay, yeah, so you need to be able to typically pass the patent bar. Michigan is not where most of the patent jobs are. Most of them are in California. You're right, there's some in Texas. You should be applying all over the country to patent jobs. The best thing you can do is become really to pass the patent bar first. That's what I would recommend. And I don't know what type of science background you have, but the most in demand is electrical, followed by physics and computer science, and then to a lesser extent bio, and then to a lesser extent mechanical. But you get the experience, you really do need to pass the patent bar to be a patent attorney. Okay. I graduated from the LLM program at Harvard Law School in 2015 and currently live in New York. I'm a U.S. citizen. I've also admitted the New York bar. My area of interest includes corporate law and privacy. Having read in your article, I was wondering whether your firm works with LLMs. I'm curious to know whether you work with many LLMs from top law schools and what kind of positions, if any, they were able to find for themselves. So getting a job in the United States as an LLM, and Harvard's got a big program, and there's lots of big programs at Georgetown and other things, are certainly something you can do, and you can certainly get jobs as an LLM. The problem is most law firms, American law firms, do prefer people with JDs. I'm not sure the exact reasons for that, because certainly LLMs can do a good job, but they do prefer people with JDs, and so it makes it a little bit more difficult to get a position. The other thing is, if you do a JD program, then you also have the experience of doing on-campus interviewing, and law firms have something to compare you to other attorneys by. Whereas if you just take the LLM, they don't really have any US types of law grades and so forth to compare you against. So people do find jobs as LLMs. A lot of times, though, they're jobs like one-year type of positions with US international law firms that are things like legal consultant or foreign legal consultant, and they get a job for 1 or 2 years and that's it. So you need to really think about, and then applying to a lot of places will be helpful. But the big thing about the LLM program is that unless you have experience in a big law firm that the law firms are familiar with in the United States before coming to work in the United States, and it's going to make things difficult. What I've seen work for attorneys in the past is explaining their foreign JDs or degrees and how well they did, and really expanding on that and making sure that the law firms see what a great job you did, how competitive it was to get good grades at your last law firm, how competitive it was to get into your law school and so forth. And so if they understand that, it can be helpful. Okay, appreciate the columns and other things you do. I'm a new attorney having trouble finding my first job, and I'm completely lost. I feel there isn't much else I can do but wait it out and keep trying. No clue, because I'm pretty average and it's a bit disappointing. I don't want to regret the last decade of choices. You need to get interested in whatever it is you're doing, and you need to have some sort of passion. If you don't have that passion, then your career's not going to have passion either. So you need to find something in the practice of law that interests you and that you're excited about. And I don't know what that is. It could be, I have a 13-year-old daughter who's excited about being a post-conviction attorney. You need to find something, and you can't get lost. So the best thing to do is to read stories about successful attorneys. A lot of times people get started very slowly in their careers, and you need to read and study and do whatever you can to get as much information as possible about the legal profession and what's interesting to you, because you need to have some sort of fire in your belly. And in order to get your first job, you just need to keep applying to lots and lots of places, and preferably places without openings as well as places with openings. And you need to keep trying, but you need to get enthusiastic. That's really what you need. Think about if you were a client. Would you want an attorney that's lost and not enthusiastic, or would you want one that's enthusiastic? I don't care what it is, whether or not you want to work in a public defender's office or a law firm, you need to have some enthusiasm. You need to work on that right away. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with the legal community. I enjoy reading your insightful and helpful articles. I'm an attorney who graduated in the top 10% of my class and was on law review in law school. I recently resigned from a full-time competitive quasi-legal government position, as I would like to work part-time. Before that, I practiced immigration law and also did contract review work. Okay, I have been searching for part-time positions the past few months, but rarely come across part-time openings. I'm also open to part-time paralegal law-related positions. Based on your expertise and experience, do part-time jobs exist for attorneys in Los Angeles? Yes, I believe they do. I believe that you can contact, we don't do it, but there's lots of temporary firms and so forth that you potentially could work in, lots of different places, and it shouldn't be too difficult for you, in my opinion, to find something temporary. My question is why you're interested in a temporary job as opposed to a permanent job. And I guess it doesn't really matter. But if it was me, I would really do what I could and you can also write law firms, especially immigration law firms can almost always use part-time attorneys. And I don't know that you need to be a paralegal. I would try to stick with being an attorney. Okay, Harrison, I find your website and articles very helpful and informative. My son just passed the bar and just started practice as a state of Florida public defender. His goal is to work for the U.S. Attorney's Office, or the SEC. He participated in an internship with the SEC while in law school. How can he best create a record which makes him an attractive candidate likely to be hired for those agencies practicing law? I'm close to retiring, so I want his career to be better than mine by planning each step thoroughly. The best way to potentially get into the U.S. Attorney's Office is just to do a really good job with the Public Defender's Office. That would be my recommendation. Typically, if he does want to work for the U.S. Attorney's Office or the SEC, he probably should also try to be a prosecutor, because the public defender is on the opposite side and is limited by budgets and all sorts of things in terms of the quality of service they can provide. So he needs to work on probably getting into the plaintiff side would be the prosecution side would be my big recommendation. I hope that helps. I live in New York City, still fully masked and socially distanced these days. Are the rules about asking work from home questions different in light of the pandemic? Trying to discern how cautious the workplace attitude is. Yeah, I think people will just bring it up automatically. I don't think you have to. I just wouldn't ask about working at home. But obviously, during this pandemic, there's no reason to. Obviously, most firms in New York are allowing people to work at home. So there's not. But some may want you to come in the office. But most of them want you to work for you. Okay, you have elaborated on what bad questions are and what pitfalls. Could you also be so kind as to elaborate on good questions? For example, how do you ask about what is a good job? How do you ask what is good? ask about what is good job or how to ask about how to get work done. You want to ask questions about things. What is your day like? What are you guys busiest about? And things along those lines. What kind of work are you working on? Where do you guys need the most help? Things that show you're willing to contribute and do good work. There are articles, I didn't cover it today, but there are articles on our website about asking what type of questions to ask. And so hopefully those can be helpful for you. There's lots of questions about articles about interviewing on the BCG site and also under my name. So I would look at those. There's lots and lots of questions. Any question that you ask should really just show your willingness to work, your enthusiasm and that sort of thing, willingness to follow directions and all that. You need to just be careful with that. Okay, on online applications, especially for in-house positions, it is frequently required to answer a question about the salary you expect. That is electronically. You cannot submit the application if you don't answer that question. How do you ensure you don't price yourself out of the job by suggesting something so high, or make yourself look bad by suggesting something too low? Also, sometimes that question comes up in live interviews, and you don't want to price yourself out or underestimate yourself. Okay, there's a couple of different things. If I don't know how frequent it is, but you're right. I know that certain online systems will ask you to say your salary requirements, and unfortunately, that will be something that you need to include a lot of times. Just because you're offered a lower salary doesn't mean you have to take it with an employer. In many cases, not all, but in many cases, you can expect to make, compared to a major law firm, as much as 50% less than you would make there, or even in many cases, half of what you would make in a major law firm working in-house, or even less than that sometimes. So you have to be very careful with that question. The best employers will not pay you less than your worth because it's a competitive market. When you're asked that question in a law firm interview, law firms do not want to have a lot of people making different amounts of money. So the best way to deal with that is really to just say, I'd like to be making something similar to what other attorneys at my level are making, and try to leave it at that. But anytime you become too flexible, there are law firms that will take advantage of that, and there are companies that will take advantage of that. Most major companies are not going to pay you much less than you could make in the market, and most major law firms won't. Most law firms won't either, because they know you can go elsewhere. You need to some extent be honest with that. But that's a good question, and so you don't want to come up with too low of a figure. Okay, I have been working in a banking role in private wealth for 3 years and licensed now to practice law and want to do trust and estates law. Good. Given the current market and not too many jobs out there, I'm entertaining a new role outside a bank that's not very much more legal. Contract work for an insurance company, JD, not licensed job, than where I'm at. It is an change of scenery and the pay is better. I'm toying with whether this move would be the correct one, but I'm tired of management of the bank and I'm just not happy. Any thoughts on what I should do or how I should approach my situation? Actually, right now, trust and estates work is very busy. If I don't understand you're working in private wealth management. Okay. Yeah, I think that you probably will not have too much trouble finding a trust and estates job, especially in a smaller firm. And you can also maybe use your contacts in private wealth management to bring in clients. So I don't know that I would do contract work for an insurance company. I think if you want to do trust and estates law and you're doing private wealth management, you should keep something on your resume that looks very consistent with what you're currently doing. And that would be my advice. And so I don't think anything that makes it look like you're doing something else is good. And I would write and apply to small trust and estates firms and stuff and leave it at that. Small and large, but I would apply to as many of those as you can. And it sounds like you have a good background for what you want to do. And there are a lot of trust and estates jobs. Trust and estates right now, because people are worried about the pandemic, is actually better than it's ever been. Good. Let's see here. What advice would you have? Oh, let's see. Someone said, I think you may have skipped my question. Scroll up. I don't see another question, but maybe I have to scroll down. Let me see. I'll answer. Give me 1 second. Okay, let's see. What advice would you have for a 10-year government attorney hoping to transition into law firm, private sector? This was my first job out of law school and was during a recession, so I had no qualms about taking it. I'm skilled in disability law, but not really interested in staying in this particular field. If you have 10 years of experience, you build on your existing experience, unfortunately. You can apply for jobs doing something else, and you certainly can apply and move into private practice, but you need to have some sort of marketing hook. And your only marketing hook that's going to get employers interested is probably going to be your existing experience in the field. So I would recommend, to the extent you can, focusing on something to do with disability law. And if not, you certainly can get a job doing something else. But if you're not doing something, it's going to be much harder for you, and you're going to be starting at ground zero. The good news is if you've only been out of school for 10 years, and it's not very long at all, and you still can start something completely new. But I would recommend, to the extent you can, trying to stick with that field. And I don't know why you're not interested in that field, but there may be other aspects of it that are interesting to you. And if not, then you should maybe try to go to a general practice firm that maybe needs someone with your experience, but that did not occupy all their time. Okay, I'm 66 years old. I want to finish my career at least 5 more years in a general counsel position. Is there any hope in my age? Yes, but it would depend on your experience and where you're interested. Thanks. Let's see. Clerked for 3 years now between 2 judges. Some employers view that as clerking too much. How would you suggest that I answer a question that challenges my willingness to litigate? That is a lot of clerking, but it's only 2 judges, and some clerkships are 2 years. So I don't really think that that's something to worry too much about. I think that, I think 3 years is just fine. And I don't think it's going to, I don't think you can answer that question by saying that you're very interested in litigation and so forth, and working with a judge has helped your writing, you've had a very good experience, but you really are very eager to get out, and just make it seem like it's not something you want to do anymore. Okay, I think that's it, everyone. Thank you for coming to this webinar, and I will talk to everyone next week. Thank you.